but
Okay, we're good.
okay. Hello. We're talking about gay liberation today. I'm Mikey. I'm the co-chair of the YDSA at K-State. Yeah. Everyone else?
I'm Sarah. I'm the outreach chair of YDSA.
I'm Mona.
Just some guy.
Member.
We got him
New
off the street.
member. Yeah, we found.
Yeah,
Just laying on.
yeah, just in a box.
Good work, good work. Yeah, it's Daniel. I'm the other co-chair of the YDSA.
Hey, I'm Jamie. I'm just a member of YDSA, but also I'm the Sexuality and Gender Alliance president here at K-State, and I'm also just munching away on some carrot sticks and stuff, so I'm gonna be muted.
Period. Okay. I got
Okay.
it.
Well, I wanted to have this education session because a month ago or so, we talked about we did an introductory to gay socialism and gay people and socialism and the development of gay people under capitalism and that kind of thing. And I thought we could, and then I was reading some more as you are doing, and I found this great magazine, and it just to talk about gay liberation and the period between Stonewall and the mainstream gay rights movement that we all know and hate. And so it really answered the question: how did it end up that Stonewall, a riot by working class, black and brown, trans people, end up in gay rights granted by gay marriage granted by the Supreme Court? How did that turn around? What happened there? And gay liberation and the failure of gay liberation is really the centerpiece of that, the answer to that question. So, right after Stonewall, an organization is formed in New York called the Gay Liberation Front. The Gay Liberation Front is named after the Vietnamese National Liberation Front. So, in that name, it's directly tying itself to communist Vietnamese, anti-imperialism. They're for the liberation of all oppressed people in their mission statement, not really the mission statement, in their manifesto. They proclaim that they're for the liberation of all oppressed peoples. And this organization is fraught with difficulties because obviously they're trying to get an organization off the ground in a time and a place where there hasn't been a gay organization with the same goals in this cross this intersectional approach. At the same way, even though they have this anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist approach to gay liberation, socialist parties and communist parties are not touching them. They're not getting any help from any kind of left movement in America from that regard. And so, because of these two factors, both the internal factors and external factors that put pressure on the Gay Liberation Front, the Gay Liberation Front in New York breaks down at the end of 1971 after being in existence for 18 months. And this is the scene in which the first edition of fagrag is published. In the second volume of fagrag, in Fagrag Blues, the author Charles Shibley talks about how the breakdown of all the Gay Liberation Front is affecting their is reminiscent and is an expression of this internal struggles of the gay community, and how gay people are having a hard time forming an identity because they are coming from radically different aspects. And I think, this is my opinion, that they're having a problem forming an identity because they're trying to have a gay movement that is a cross-class movement. But realistically, there's a class analysis that they're not totally doing. And that's probably one of the reasons why. But that's gay liberation for you. After gay liberation, what comes after the Gay Liberation Front is the Gay Activist Alliance. And the Gay Activist Alliance is a organization of gay activists and former members of the GLF. The Gay Activist Alliance becomes, I would say, more successful. They're less radical than the GLF, and they over the years become what is now the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. So they do things like ZAPs, they do things like civil rights stuff. But anyways, that's not really important to us. But just that's the progression: Stonewall, Gay Liberation Front, Gay Activist Alliance, gay marriage. That's the timeline of gay rights in America, and that's how gay rights is sold out to the capitalist class. So that's the history behind it. But now let's talk about what we read in the fagrag and how we can apply some of these lessons and some of the things that they're dealing with to our own struggles they're dealing with in their anti-capitalist gay struggle to our anti-capitalist gay struggle. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
I want to say something like before we get the conversation started about what you just said. I feel like it's worth noting the question that came up before we even started is like, how does this gay magazine relate to socialism? How is this magazine about gay liberation? How is it socialist, like specifically? Like, how would you answer that? Yeah, like, because like people will read it and just like, this is just about gay people. Not about socialism. This isn't socialist, but it is socialist. But like,
yeah. Somebody obviously, first off, it's socialist because I say it is, because I'm the co-chair of the socialist organization, and you guys will read what I tell you to. But second off, it's socialist because these people are socialist and Marxist and communists. They're more anarchists. They lean more anarchist. But in that they are very interested in the project of socialism, as can be seen in the articles that I selected. Like they have articles about Cuba. They have articles about being gay in Cuba and about being gay in the Soviet Union. They have articles about, they have at least one article about Karl Marx and his relationship with homosexuality. So, you know, they're interested in the magazine, in socialism, and they are socialists to some degree. So I thought that was interesting. And seeing as how I would like gay liberation, but I would also like to study why we don't have gay liberation right now. Why this gay liberation movement did not end up in socialism and did not end up in gay liberation. And why is that? Because they weren't firm enough in their socialism to effectuate that in the real world. In my opinion.
And then on the exact like other side of the coin, it's very important in order for socialist revolution to like actually be successful, is to not be anti-gay or anti racism or anything. Yes. It's a crucial part because they talk about this in the Cuba article, why there are problems with the Cuban Revolution, and they were homophobic. They didn't like gay people, and that was a problem because when you have this like outcast group of people, you can never truly get away from capitalism because there's always some other group that isn't liberated. You can't achieve socialism if not every single person is liberated in who they are. But the Cuban one was my favorite one. The other one I read was the Fagrag Blues, which is really good. I think the YDSA specifically could benefit from that because it has to deal with a lot of like organizing strategies and how to talk to your fellow organizers. The other one I read, what was it called?
How to proselytize.
That one was just silly.
I like that one.
That was silly.
What was that word you used?
Proselytize.
I liked that that article. I thought it was an interesting exploration of front-facing identity, like the identity that you present to the world. And I think that as an anthropology student is something that I find really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Just like what do you show versus what are you? And what does being anything mean? But that's more conceptual.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So.
Yeah, if you'll want to mute to avoid the echo, and then perfect. Yeah, I thought that I was really kind of drawn to reading more into Charles Shively's like life as well. I didn't learn too many new like facts beyond the article that we originally read, but I thought that by reading a little bit of his work and also of some of the works that are in the publication, it kind of gave me this idea of a person that I think is only really touched on in that sort of biography that we read. someone who seems to be kind of like, at least in my opinion, in between political ideologies at all times, in a sort of like state of flux with his political ideologies. And I think reasonably so, in a world that is like trying to formulate both direct resistances to the things, the kinds of marginalization that he is literally facing, and also trying to theorize more broadly in a successful sort of strategic way. And I think that his end goals are not super clear throughout his life. Like each phase of his life, involvement in different movements and creation of things like this publication are just examples of how I think that he was really looking for some kind of direction and was trying to provide it. But what I really admire is the fact that he didn't kind of like sit around and wait for someone else to provide him direction, and just was kind of like willing to say sort of, F you to anyone who was just like, no, that's not quite the right direction. You need to be more perfect this way. Like, I think there's something to be said about that, where a lot of people are decrying the way that the left is eating itself alive or cannibalizing itself in that way, where we're always hypercritical of ourselves. We want to be perfect. We want to be excellent. And that's not a bad or like not virtuous thing. But I think that this is a good example of like, dudes living in 1920s America, if I remember right, the time period here is definitely experiencing, no, is it the 40s?
It's
in the 70s.
70s.
70s? Okay,
Yeah.
70s.
After Stonewall.
This is after Stonewall. The publication is
Right.
on.
But you're good though. You're good. Keep going.
Cool. So 70s. Regardless, this is still an extremely hostile time to a lot of gay individuals, and in particular, also a burgeoning time of like figuring out what gay even means, figuring out what queer means, and what those things mean to those communities, and how those like terms and identities are developing. So I respect someone who's just like, yeah, no, like we're all on sort of the cutting edge of developing these identities and feelings and understandings and emotions. And so it's really interesting to see that kind of come out in his work, and then kind of read through that perspective from the magazine itself.
I would also say I think he's very interesting, especially in that article. He's certainly a man of contradictions, because in the article it mentions that he's a committed gay liberationist for his whole life. This is what he believes in. But he's in a relationship with a man who is anti-political for most of his life, for 20 or 30 years. And and that's in like an antagonistic relationship. So that's in some ways he talks a little bit about it in the magazine, but anyways, I wouldn't want to read it too much into it, but it briefly mentioned in the article. So I think that's very interesting that he himself has that contradiction about him.
That's a really interesting point, Mikey. If I can just say,
Yeah. Dude.
I feel like the queer community right now is in kind of a weird place where we're all just kind of barking at each other and about like what queerness is to us. And I think you made a really good point, Daniel, about how we right now, how he was, and I'm just drawing a parallel here to how we are right now, are moving forward with queer identity and redesigning it and just analyzing it and digesting it and looking at our ancestors,
Yeah. I feel like Daniel, did you read Fagrag Blues? One of the articles that Daniel.
That is one of the few that I didn't get to read.
Okay, well, you hit a lot of the talking points that he covered in that article. Basically, like leftist infighting, fighting over what it means to be gay, homosexual, and how that like really deters from like the goals of what. And it's just everybody's goals. It's because we can't necessarily agree on everything. And I don't know what the point I was trying to make when I started talking, but I feel like he would like fact records because he like really articulates well the problem, the internal struggle that you deal with when you don't necessarily agree with everything with the organizers in your own community and how to like deal with that.
Jamie.
Want to mute? Yeah. Jamie.
So, I did not get read. I did not do my due diligence. I'm also choking on my dinner as we speak. Yeah, I'm just kind of here to like listen and absorb in, but I kind of liked what Mona was saying about us barking at it, like barking across at each other and stuff. Um, I mean, I would honestly say that just based on everything that I'm seeing, it's just like I know who we need to be barking at, and it's not one another. So, yeah. I didn't do my due diligence on my reading, but just kind of going off of that fun language, like we should go bark at other people. Should go bark at the people who are pressing us, not
That's a really,
each other.
I feel like like queer people, like we are mad at each other. We're mad at people in our specific letters. We're mad at other people across the alphabet. Like, and it's it's
Not productive at all.
it's not productive at all.
I mean, you can see, and you can see that in the Gay Liberation Front, because the Gay Liberation, one of the splinter groups of the Gay Liberation Front is the like lesbian feminist group.
Mhm.
It like starts as a women's group in the Gay Liberation Front, and then it breaks off into its own group. And like so, obviously, women are not having their voices heard in the general gay gay organization, but they take that elsewhere.
This is reminding me.
Has like an animosity between women and gay women and gay men.
This is reminding me of one of like the things that I was most dissatisfied with at convention is all of the different caucuses and like all of the different individual groups. They're like, oh, these are the people that like really, really agree with me, but we're ignoring the fact that we really agree with each other on most things, but we love to like be so individualized and like I'm right, I'm not going to listen to anybody else. And it's the same, he talks about it, there was a gay liberation front and then it splinters off into all these different groups, and then all of those groups eventually disband because we don't have a united front, and it's like killing us. Like actually.
Yeah.
I think what specifically, and I know more about like queer lib than I do about anything else in this conversation, but I feel like queer people are operating like we're gaining something out of infighting. And let us not forget France.
What happened?
They be killing each other.
No, that's no. In the French Revolution.
Oh.
They be
How did
killing each other.
Yes, twin. How did the French Revolution get squashed that one time?
Because they started killing each other.
No, because of the infighting, twin. Twin, it was the CIA.
Wait, what are you talking about?
The CIA weaseled its way into the French leftist revolution.
What year?
That's true.
Or like what time?
No,
It was like in
Which
the
one?
60s
Which
or
one?
60s.
Okay.
Dr. Rockhill would say that that revolution was entirely made by the CIA, but it was
So
CIA.
what I'm hearing is that the CIA is the one that's bringing up he/him lesbians. That's what I'm hearing.
He/him lesbians. You're absolutely right. Not that he/him lesbians are a part of the CIA.
No.
Can we all just say?
Just to clarify.
Can we all just say, do what you want? It's not really my business.
Unless you're
Yes.
rich, at which point you can't be that.
We
We have to have a correct analysis so that we are not fighting people who are our class allies and instead fighting people who are our class enemies.
Mhm.
And that's what the gay movement doesn't have. It doesn't have a class analysis.
and when we are fighting the guys
Yeah.
up there, we're not really fighting for the right things. We're fighting for gay marriage. We're not fighting for like
Yeah.
abolition of like
Because
Commercialization.
yes. It's just weird.
It's weird. It's not a
more
constant.
than one.
Wait, what did he say?
More than one bank account can't be a EM lesbian.
Sorry. Wait. William, I feel like we haven't heard from you at all.
I feel like we haven't heard from him very much. Though.
Do you have any opinions about anything?
Cool.
He's just listening. That's okay. That's okay. What else do we have to talk? Mona just whispered in my ear that William is eating crackers. Okay.
I just wanted to take the
I feel like it's gone by 26 minutes has gone like that.
I'm just going to talk about random articles that I read in the fagrag, because it's a great paper. Like Daniel mentioned in a few days ago or yesterday, there's a lot of articles from prisoners, and from gay prisoners, and about the abuse that gay prisoners were facing in the prison system. They were like forming there's an article that particularly sticks out, one of the last ones, in the archive. Just shout out University of Southern Maine, first off, for having this in their archive. But also it's not a complete archive of all the issues. So there's issues that were made that we can't read. Anyways, but one of the last issues, they have an article about gay prisoners where the prison like strong-armed two gay men into signing like signing forms that was like the prison wouldn't be responsible for their deaths, and then the gay men were like killed because the prison knew that they were under threat, and that happened to these two men, and it also happened to another man who was the organizer of a gay prisoners coalition, gay prisoners or coalition. And he was also killed in prison. Yeah, it's not like there's any there's no good things that have changed in that regard, I don't think. So I mean, I don't really know, but
people are still dying in prison.
People are still dying in prison, and like this is back in the 70s, so it's like there were less people in prison than there are right now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but I think it's interesting that you don't see that in like modern gay activism almost at all. Like that's not a center point, but the people at the fagrag were like, no, this is a center point of our activism, because these are our most oppressed brothers.
And I'm just making a guess, but I'm sure that gay men and trans women in prisons now they're not safe now just because we have gay marriage now. They definitely still face that very specific kind of violence that should be talked about more, but isn't.
Yeah.
Because we're focused on the wrong things.
The thing
I think. Wait, sorry. Sorry.
I'm just gonna pop in really quick. I don't know if I still have access to the article. I'm sure I could go way back in my history, but when I was taking queer rights and the law this summer, I read a couple really interesting perspectives on hate crime law and how we can't use the criminal justice system as a means for liberation for any of us, but specifically queer liberation. But I'm gonna have to dig back like 2 months from here in my browser history to see if it's still there, because I don't have access to the course anymore. I should have saved a lot more of those materials, but I'll see if I can find it.
I feel like I read that same article in like GWiz 110 or whatever.
Who did you have?
Weaver.
That tracks. That's not who I had. I had Dr. Levitt, but that does track.
Yeah, I feel like, it was a good article too. Have to know. Yes. Sorry.
I was just saying I have notes for this. I have a couple of thoughts. Yeah, so from my reading of like issue 6, and I kind of wanted to highlight this one because this was I worked backwards. This is why I didn't read some of the initial articles, is because I worked in the opposite direction, trying to see what the like latest and kind of like the last few issues would look like. So I'll talk about issue 6 because I know that was on the reading list, so I wanted to capture at least something that kind of overlapped. And there were 2 things that really stood out to me. First is, and this will become very relevant to the like Obergefell Hodges and all that stuff in a moment. The first thing that stood out to me is with regard to like leftist infighting, is this in the beginning, they have this correspondence section where they publish some person who sent them this like nasty gram about how they think that the rag is just like totally falling apart and has no editorial consistency. It is like so horrible, and like in particular calls out one article for like potentially endorsing sadism masochism as a way for like men to achieve liberation. Like for those of you who have not read this article, this like portion of the article, it is a fascinating nastygram like internal critique with like a million prefaces of like, don't worry, I still appreciate all the work you do, but like this is how horrible you are. And then at the end they have the response correspondent, and I think this is kind of telling of how they deal with this kind of criticism, and I think it's something that we can learn from here. The guy who wrote the article that's being criticized does two things. He says, all in quite a letter, and then talks about how very clearly, quote, diagnosing sickness, he gives Dr. Bieber a run for his money, and like makes a bunch of quips about how this guy is like really invested in being kind of nasty in this response. But then like while defending his article, still ends it off with just like, yeah, but we went ahead and published your poem that you sent to us because like that's part of the article. So it was kind of funny because the original comment that he made as part of this like kind of leftist infighting, of just being like, this is how terrible I think your thing is, it's all falling apart. And then at the end, they're like, yeah, thank you for that criticism. We'll go ahead and publish it, and we'll publish the poem you sent us. Sounds good. When the original criticism was, y'all just will publish anything. And I understand why that's important, but like, why would you? And so then they publish his stuff. So I think it's a good example of how to be like, kind of have fun with that infighting. That is a good example of, I don't know if y'all's experience with convention felt like this, but I do think there's moments that even despite that infighting, that like many of the resolutions, I looked at the votes from that convention, like the votes were largely in line with one another, and the majority of the YDSA voted in the same direction. And so I think that that is like super important to reflect on. But kind of putting a bow on the like leftist infighting stuff, because we could return to that anytime. I wanted to talk about like the legal context here of like Obergefell Hodges and like liberalization of gay liberation from today's perspective. I just recently saw a video from a guy who's like, I wrote my thesis on that court case and how it could be overturned. So he explains, and I think very fairly convincingly, that part of the reason why potentially hate crime legislation and other things like it cannot be used to defend gay rights as a liberatory mechanism, why essentially liberal institutions can't be used to defend it as a liberatory mechanism, is because the whole Obergefell Hodges decision was written on the sanctity of marriage for all, not on the equal protection clause. It was on the Dobbs decision more about privacy than about the question of equal protection and discrimination. So because of that legal argument difference, and the same with like hate crimes, where like language policing often comes up in this discussion and things like that, where it's like, oh, well, if it cuts one way, it has to cut the other way. It's like, the original author of the decision in Obergefell v. Hodges specifically wrote it so that it either could be overturned later, or that it was on shaky grounds to begin with, because he didn't want to recognize the fact that like being anti-gay is a discriminatory practice. He wanted to ensure that people still have the power to do so. And so it's like a great evidence of how similarly that this like publication is trying to check back on this, is like, despite all of our differences, despite the way that we think differently about the world, how much can we just kind of like say, screw it, let's write the stuff that matters to us, and not have to listen to things like a 9-person Supreme Court of largely, wealthy white people who get bought off by big corporations and are never going to support us, or a Congress that is largely, lobbied to in thousands of dollars every year, millions of dollars every year, and those kinds of things, where they're just like, no, we're just going to write our own shit because that's way better than any of the mainstream stuff we've been getting.
I know there's even an article, and I wasn't able to find the original article, but there's an article in there, I can't remember which issue because I've read all the issues, that was like specifically calling out the gay magazine, The Advocate, for their sensational coverage of a hate crime or something like that, or it was some kind of gay related incident. But they were like, fuck you, the Advocate. Like, this is exactly what our enemies are writing about us, and you're publishing this on the front page of your paper. And I read that article and I was like, I'm glad that the Advocate has always been shit. So I knew it was shit in like the 80s, but I'm glad to know that it's been shit since it started. But yeah.
I'm trying to think of what's response to the legal stuff that Daniel was talking about. I just don't know shit about the
Yeah.
No, I mean that it's true that the gay marriage decision is, on shaky ground, and especially anything that is based on privacy is on very, very shaky ground because if you make something based on privacy, say, because like most of gay, like the right to gay sex is, then the state has an interest in obstructing your ability to do things in private. First off, an example of this is in Patrick Khalifa's essay on this. He says so. There's like adult video stores where you have like rooms or like cubicles where you like watch the porn and then like masturbate. Well, this was legal, and by all means, this is a like enclosed space. So illegally, this is a private space. But then they like passed a law in a certain state. I can't remember which state. To like to make the doors like cut off at the bottom, so that it would be more public. So then they could prosecute people for being in the adult video store and having sex. So that's an example of how a private space gets turned into a public space so that it can regulate. So the state has an interest in turning the private space into a public space so that it can then regulate it. When something is based on privacy as a concern, instead of just like your human right to have sex. And obviously, also privacy is a really, really bad thing to base something on because obviously privacy is a wealth thing. Privacy is you have more privacy the richer you are. If you're very poor, you have no privacy. This has been a fact. Privacy is bourgeois for very long. In Britain, for example, the first time they decriminalized gay sex. I mean, and also for us, but in Britain specifically, they decriminalized like having gay sex in private between consenting adults and adults being 21. But like you couldn't have if you were in your room with your like boyfriend and you were having sex like in your bedroom, there could not be anyone else in the apartment because that was considered having a third person, and they were considered that made that space no longer private in the eyes of the law. You couldn't have a threesome because one of the three people was considered like an observer, so it was not private. But basically, what the legalization of certain types of gay sex mean is that types of gay sex that are not as that the state doesn't like, that are more detrimental to the state, like sex outside of marriage, sex outside of the home, that kind of thing, is what then gets policed. For example, in the fagrag, he talks about this, where he's like, gay people, some gay activists are looking down on people who cruise Fenway and people who are in tea rooms cruising and people in the bars. They're looking down on these people as like homosexuals, even though these are the people that we need to be incorporating into the movement. Because the state will always find a way to persecute you for being homosexual, even if gay sex is legal. If there isn't a right to have gay sex or a right to have sex generally, then the state will persecute you for being gay. An example of this, not to go on, but example of this is in Marcus McCann's book, Park Cruising, What Happens When We Wander Off the Beaten Path. He was a lawyer, and he worked on this case where the police had ticketed people for being in a park after dark. They were cruising, like ticketing gay men for cruising, and they didn't ticket them for indecent exposure or gay sex or any of that. They ticketed them just like a bylaw infraction for like being in a park after it was dark. And there was no one, and they expected that no one would fight the ticket because like no one fights those kinds of tickets. And the police were shocked when gay people organized and fought the tickets and got like all of them revoked, that the ticket that they fought. But that's one example of how the state will find different ways to persecute gay sex, even if gay sex technically is legal.
I have a question for the room. I know people, I feel like it's a very small chance that gay marriage will get turned over, but if it does, what's the move? What are we gonna do about it?
I'm leaving.
I'm not gay married, so I don't give a fuck.
That's what But like, is there gonna we just like sit there and take it, or what?
I'm gonna leave.
We just keep doing socialism, you know? We keep doing socialism.
Oh, hell no.
One good analysis that I just watched like a slew of videos today about it, because like the big, the fact that the Supreme Court just took the case and is going to hear it is really, really like actually scary. The fact that they even decided to do that means they have some kind of majority who wants to even consider it. That's frustrating, but specifically because the Obergefell decision cited Dobbs, and Dobbs is cited in Roe Wade. So the whole reason is Dobbs leads to privacy, privacy leads to Roe Wade, leads to Obergefell, all of that stuff. So for those who don't know, that's like where all that comes from. And so since the Dobbs decision now no longer founds Roe Wade, the Dobbs decision now no longer founds gay marriage, now we go back to Dobbs and be like, well, wait a second, what about birth control? What about like healthcare? What about all these other things and privacy rights that we previously had? Those can go away, right, too? And so it's like there's definitely a significant rollback that's happening. The analysis that I saw makes probably the most sense on this, and it says that two of the previous people who voted to prevent Obergefell v. Hodges from succeeding are still on the Supreme Court. They will vote the exact same way again, almost guaranteed. The third person, who was also there, previously voted to make sure that Obergefell of Hodges did not succeed, has been recently more like pro-gay and trans rights and like voted on the trans rights decision, even though it ended up failing, I think. So he's probably going to end up voting in the positive. But then you've got like Barrett, you've got Ketanji Brown Jackson is obviously going to vote, to keep Obergefell. Then you've got like Sotomayor, who will keep Obergefell, but you've got maybe 3 people who are ready to keep Obergefell, maybe a 4th, and then you've got solidly 4 others who are pretty guaranteed vote, to repeal it. Because truly, the Dobbs decision legal argument is actually kind of spurious and doesn't make much sense on those grounds alone, and it should have been based on discrimination, but they refused to do it. So given all of that context, it's very likely to be overturned. My response to like, what do we do afterward? Two things. One is like marriage tourism that already existed before the Obergefell decision. The Obergefell decision just said that if you have marriage for straight couples, you have to have marriage for gay couples now too, in every single state. And so I imagine it's just going to be like, if you want to get gay married, you have to go and do your marriage in Napa Valley. Like you basically just have to go do that, which is also a wealth thing now. Privacy is tied to wealth and class. And so now, including discrimination and all those things, your freedom to do anything is tied to your ability to do things like marriage tourism, or your protection of your abortion rights is tied to your ability to do things like medical tourism. That's also true of our just general healthcare system, where like your ability to survive is tied to your ability to afford medical care, not just here, but tour to another country that has better healthcare than we do in order to complete whatever surgery you need. So it's like, that's the like logical conclusion. And the other like second point that I have for, what do we do if all that falls down is just genuinely like fucking kiss in public, like make it other people's problem. That is the kind of shit that got Obergefell as far as it did. I think as far as like optically, when I was little me in middle school reading about this stuff because I was a nerd, and most of what was happening was a lot of like the LGBTQ question was just so on people's mind that it really kind of pushed forward that conversation. And I think that we can also learn from like the 70s and this publication, right? Like they write very clearly why they call themselves the fagrag on purpose, so that they're saying, no, we're not going to let the straight man like take this word, you know, for against us, and we're going to utilize that in these purposes. It's like those are the common sort of resistance tactics that have been used for decades, for centuries, and they work. They work because they annoy people, and then they do things like privacy decisions. I mean, hell, think about interracial marriage, right? That for interracial marriage, and when I think that was the Virginia v. Love decision, that one was supported on similar grounds about privacy and the sanctity of marriage, because of the fact that people were just so vehemently emotionally reactive in a lot of ways to just seeing interracial couples exist in society. They were like, you know what, go home and do that. We'll leave you the private space to go do that, because we're sick and tired of seeing it. And it's like, honestly, that's kind of the sum of the ways that like bigotry turns on itself and like allows liberalism to succeed in that way. But that's not like long-term solution. Neither of these solutions, like marriage tourism or that, are long-term solutions. Long-term solution is like, obviously this needs to be in a constitutional amendment. We need the equal protection clause to be expanded, and that shit, like bare minimum, needs to happen, let alone like new constitution that actually defines all people as being human beings deserving of equal treatment. Like, goddamn it.
Yeah, obviously we're going to talk about this in, first off, I'm writing an article for the Weekly Rose about this topic from the perspective of Kansan, and what, you know, the rollback of gay rights means in that perspective. And secondly, we're going to talk about this fucking 100% of the time during the week of mourning. We're talking about the death of capitalist gay rights, and we want the path forward for gay rights is to tie itself to socialism, because socialism is the path forward, and gay rights is the path forward, and gay liberation is the path forward. And I think that there's no way that the socialist society that we create in America, or you know, in the world, but specifically in America, will not be one that is gay positive, because socialists right now are like extremely gay for one thing, for one for one point. But yeah, I think that's the future forward for gay rights. We have to be socialist. We have to get more. We have to not only get, you know, socialists to be into gay rights, but gay people to be default socialists. That's my goal. That's my goal, is to get every gay person to be, instead of going towards liberal capitalist gay rights, to start seeing socialism as the viable alternative to achieve their liberation. And that's unfortunately the task that we have before us. So yes.
This will make a banger Instagram post.
Flip that shit. No, I think that's really important, Mikey. Like, I think that everything that we can read and return back to this publication is really important here. Two things that we were talking about before was, one is the like anarchism of this publication and the fluidity of it may be a problem, and we can get into that. But two is that they were all largely tied to this notion of anti-capitalism and like pro-socialism as like a project of anti-capitalism, in a similar way that during like Marx's time, when he was writing the Communist Manifesto, and we've had this discussion before about how he was like, hey, not all socialists are made equal, but they all hate capitalism, and we can like start from that. And so it was like, when he said feudal socialism at his time, it was like, oh, people want to return to feudalism because they think capitalism is bad. They're still socialists because they are anti-capitalist, but like, you know, that you know, kind of like distinction of feudal socialist matters in a similar way that like being an anarchist does matter for what your strategies are, your approaches are. But the fact that like we have common ground about just like, this system is messed up, and the reason it's messed up is because of the people we should be barking at, not the ones that we are. And that's the like the oligarchs who determine a lot of what, you know, is available in politics or possible within a liberal system. Those are the kinds of things that we need to be attacking. And so when people often run up on like all of these questions, even Charles Shively talks about it in, I think, well, Charles Shively gets talked about in that biopic, and it's like, I think that it is relevant to say that much of his life was trying to find out what is that like ultimate strategy. And I think a lot of queer people get stuck in a lot more of, they have that, in my experience with the queer people I know, there's a lot of struggle to both find yourself and then find yourself in the movement, because there's a dual pressure of you have to be perfect because you have to know yourself very well. But despite even not knowing yourself very well, there's also that equal pressure to have that sort of like perfect energy to be part of whatever the movement is, i.e. in the queer LGBTQ rights space, you have to know what we need to do in response to Obergefell being overturned, just as equally as you have to know where you are on these sexuality spectrums to interact and even form relationships with others in the community, that I think can be useful in the sense of like self-discovery, but it can also be damaging in the sense of like it's extremely taxing and exhausting for queer people to be in that dual position that we have to recognize, of being exhausted by their social position under capitalism, but also exhausted by the individual search for like truth or understanding in that way.
Yeah.
You ate that, bruh. I really agree with everything you just said. That was really good.
I need you to come say that like 1 to 2 minute thing that you just said in front of Saga at the beginning of the year, and then let's just leave it at that.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Oh no. I do want to point out one more thing about the fagrag, and that this is not this is a failing of the fagrag, but they are also down on bisexuals. They do not like bisexuals, and it's like 1 or 2 times, but they're like, they think bisexuals are like kind of hangers on, and they're not like really gay. And that this is a theme of like the first wave of gay liberation, is like bisexual is just like a word that means like people who's like kind of half and half gay, sometimes straight, instead of being like gay people or queer people in their own right and like part of the movement. There is the first in San Francisco, there was a bi center, and what was it? What was the founder of the center? I can't remember his name. It's David. I can't remember his last name.
It's okay.
Anyways, but he was like, yeah, we were in the parade, and the gay like newspaper printed every single person who was in the parade except for our center, our bisexual community center, because they were anti-bisexual.
Because being bi is straight means bad.
Yeah, yeah, because being bi is straight meaning bad. We got a kick out of this section in the Fagrag Blues where he's like, where people call everything that they don't like straight identified, and everything that they do like gay identified, and we were like, yeah. That's just gay people. That's so gay people.
Gay people be doing that, but it's not productive.
It's not productive.
Yo, do you want me to ruin that with some class analysis right now? Yeah, okay. This is like the classic Adam ruins everything moment where I'm like, it's so fun to think about that moment where it's like, yeah, a lot of queer people tend to identify what is positive or useful to them in political strategy as like necessarily identitarian, that it's just like part of the gay identity to be like, pro-political in those ways, which leads to, I think, a few things that happen. One is that you end up getting a lot of queer conservatives because they see acting like being gay, that identity, as inherently political, and then they just like, it's not that they choose the wrong party, it's that there's no like, the gay identity does not have its own political direction. And so I think that they kind of like look for a way to feel that notion of like being political while also having the identity gay, and sort of affirming that identity through conservatism, where they say, well, the only way to secure my like gay identity within the world is to like support capitalism because it makes everybody better, or like individual choice and individual freedom as like a method of securing queer freedom in that way. And particularly gay men who end up falling into this because of like obviously trans misogyny and things like that, that make it more likely that they are to agree with conservatives than they are to any liberal or leftist in general. But the other factor that this leads to is like, let's not forget just like classic bourgeois identity politics, right? That like the queer aesthetic on TikTok and the way that algorithms sort of put us in little boxes, and we continue to reinforce those little boxes to ourselves, when like queer theorists of the 60s, 50s, 70s, 80s, all the way back in history, like centuries ago, you could call many Greek philosophers experimenting with queer theory in their own right. that like over all the time, many queer people doing theory have been like, no, 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 this is not a static identity that you can draw a box around and like put on a t-shirt. This is like a thing that is outside or at least different from what the like narrative, the normative social paradigm is. And like this article that I'm reading, I think it's Reds and Gays or something like that. What is it? That would be very typical of the rag to say this. I'm trying to look up the title so that I don't get it incorrect. Red and Gay. Yes, that's correct. That article is a critique of like East Berlin, the one controlled by the USSR, and is a critique about how East Berliners actually end up becoming more anti-gay because they associate gayness with bourgeois identity politics. And so there's a mismatch with how to fight for gay liberation without also falling to bourgeois identity politics. So the question is like, how do we mediate in a sphere of like, gayness does not inherently mean left, gayness doesn't necessarily mean progressive, or queerness doesn't mean progressive. So how do we orient ourselves in a way that avoids the problems of those like bourgeois identity politics that take us in the direction of like living as ourselves as individuals and not as like a part of a collective, a self that can be marketed, a self that can be bought, sold, or like proffered through commodity capitalism?
I think it's just recognizing that nobody is gay or straight. Like everyone is, you know,
Sexual.
yes, everyone is sexual. We all be having sex. Well, not everyone, but there is no gay and straight. It's fake, and it's the sooner that people realize it, that section of identity politics will fall away, I think.
Yeah, I think what we've been talking about is just how gay identity is constructed under capitalism. But under communism, there doesn't need to be that same construction of gay identity because the pressures of capitalism aren't. Because obviously, the oppression of homosexuals is what creates homosexuals. But if there is no oppression of homosexuals, because the state has no reason to oppress homosexuals, because the state does not need to make an enemy of its own people, i.e., communism, then gay identity will fall away. There won't be but sexual liberation will obviously remain. And that's the problem, I think, in the modern gay rights movement is that we think that, gay people have advanced so much because we see gay people, and as gay people, we see gay people in our daily lives and we associate with gay people and we talk to gay people. But reality, there's, just as many people who are what we would call not out, what we would say in the closet. But in the same way, I don't think that's really true because there are people who would be liberated by the who need sexual liberation, but not gay liberation because our because the like idea of gay is inherently divisive, it divides us between gay people and straight people. And like there is no such thing as a division between gay people and straight people. We're all people, but at the same time, and I've forgotten where I'm going with this. I've forgotten where I'm going with this. Anyways, that's all to say that I think under communism, people will be sexually liberated, and that having gay liberation for people who are willing to be out as gay or be outcast in society is not quite the same thing as just general sexual liberation, even though I think they do go hand in hand. So that's what I have to say about that. Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Jamie, do you have any other thoughts about like I noticed this a lot. I try to like study from the outside, but I'm obviously not in these spaces. Do you have thoughts about like the way that sort of organizing on specifically like queer LGBTQ lines can either cause like unity or division? Because I think I was reading, there's also some moments in here about how, like in the Red and Gay article, where they talk about like, homosexuality itself sort of transcends national borders and creates a kind of like identitarian solidarity, a kind of notion of like common experience. While later in the article, he does detail and outline how like East Berliners have a different notion of homosexuality than West Berliners and what those identities mean or how they're experienced. but like he still says that there's like some level of common experience between them. So I'm curious what thoughts you might have about like what does it mean to organize in like queer spaces for like queer issues, maybe without the context of socialism or this like class analysis.
First of all, I don't know what you mean by it from an insider's perspective. I think I'm definitely an outsider here. Like I'm just watching in on everything. But from my outside perspective as well, no, it's just I don't know. It's you see who routinely shows up whenever it's things related to like attempts at queer organizing here, specifically at K-State, because that's just where I've had the most experience. And repeatedly, you can see it's like the same kinds of people that show up because they're the ones that are experiencing or have witnessed the most forms of oppression. It's like that's just how it ends up being. Like, but the people who are, I mean, I'm not gonna say like that there's not people who feel uncomfortable or unsafe because of their marginalization to join in, but it's also some people who experience less marginalization based on their queer identity are also the ones who aren't showing up or maybe even are defending the oppression in the first place. Cough, cough, I'm not going to name his name, but I think we know. Yeah, it's just, yeah, that's just kind of my like most common thing. Like, and it's incredibly frustrating, but also I have to think to myself, like, where am I doing that? Like, where is there that I'm just like, hey, wait a minute, I don't need to get involved in this. William, I'll shoot you a message in a sec. But
I want to know too.
I'll shoot a message in a second. I'll disclose my cough cough.
It'll just be in the chat, not in the
yeah.
like the main.
Yeah.
Then we'll just not
But
read it.
yeah. Where was I? I lost my spot for a second. But yeah, I have to think as well, like, where am I kind of doing that same pattern? Of like, oh, I don't have maybe like the time or energy to get involved in this, or maybe like it takes me a while to even realize, oh my gosh, no, this is also a thing that I need to like be paying attention to and need to get myself involved in because it's a form of oppression that I'm complicit in, maybe for myself or maybe for other people or both. But yeah. So that's just kind of my little spitball on the spot kind of this is what I've experienced sort of thing. And I mean, it's also really frustrating, specifically being like attempting to do some form of queer organization at K-State, having to deal with all of these rules that intersect with like state law, federal law, regulations, especially being so closely tied to the government. This is the one good thing that I think is going to come out of the desponsoring of these organizations like Sexuality and Gender Alliance, like Black Student Union, and all of these organizations that have had a history of being sponsored by the university. We're now less associated with them, and now we don't have to play by the rules, constantly capitulate. Like at one point, our previous advisor for Saga told us not to speak out about Palestine when we wanted to, like November 23, because we were tied to the university, someone associated with them in their office. And they were like, I don't want to take this risk. I'm not going to have you guys do that. So I think that's going to be one of the few things that comes out of this. It's going to definitely be a pain and a struggle at first, but yeah, it's kind of where I'm at.
I think we can kind of see that through this, because the contradictions of capitalism are being intensified through fascism. This is what we're in right now. That means that capitalism is creating its enemies. It's created its enemies by educating them and oppressing them and then giving them their identities. And now it is seeing the fruits of its labor in that it has now identity groups which hate it, which have a great reason to hate capitalism. So anyways, if you're gay and you're watching this, you should become a socialist.
Or if you're not gay.
If you're not gay, you should also become a socialist, but specifically if you're gay, you should be a socialist.
And if you're watching this, you should become gay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Look, you could be gay too.
That part.
Yeah.
That part.
There's nothing wrong with being gay.
All of the parts.
Yes. Okay, I think that's all we have to say about this.
I think Daniel has something to say.
Yeah, like I think on like that sort of notion there, I want to like break down a little bit of propaganda that often is taught about like college and socialism that is often proffered as like, socialism is what's going to turn you gay, or gays turn you socialist, or all of these things. And it's like, okay, yes, a little bit. But also also like, but why? But like, why? And the answer is largely because of what I was speaking about earlier, about how like queerness is inherently political because of the nexus of oppression, right? This is what Marx is talking about when he says that oppressed classes uniquely have the consciousness in order to respond to their situation. This is why the working class has the unique ability to learn about how the bourgeoisie operates and then be able to fight against them, because they are literally facing it every single day. And so the bourgeois can't like understand any of that because they're just like proffering the oppression. So like obviously they don't know how to fight against their own oppression, because why would they think about that? Like it's just not something they would think about. So this is the interesting part about like particularly queer liberation, is that much of queer studies teaches, I think most people who learn it, that like queerness is inherently political, because if you are in the mainstream, it is by definition not queer enough. That like saying straight people are queer doesn't make any sense, because that's the whole point of queerness, is that it is not that. And so to say that you are like just one and the same with others, or try to like seek equal rights in that sense from the liberal perspective, you're defeating the very purpose of the life that you are trying to seek. Rather than trying to seek liberation, you are seeking an assimilation, right? And so you either have to make some kind of concessions along the way, which is sort of what conservatives do. And they say that I can access my individual freedom by being conservative and then supporting capitalism, which harms others. And so then they lose a lot of things like empathy, and become assholes. But despite that, we also have this like, why are so many queer people socialist? It's because they genuinely realize that like, wait a second, there's this otherization in the world that exists. And where is the biggest side of that otherization coming from? Well, okay, who has the power? Is it individual politicians who like scream slurs at me? Okay, probably not, because like I can, there's some level of agency I have in that situation when someone yells a slur at me. But what is that agency? Where does that come from? Likely my ability to kind of ignore or keep walking or whatever. But I have like no agency in the context where I'm like at my job and my boss can fire me, but he hates gay people and will fire me if he finds out I'm gay. Like that is the kind of like direct power over someone's life. Or think about in politics, right? Like politicians have power over you. They can ignore you and your demands because they're listening to money and interests, right? And then can enact policies that make your life harder, try to invade your private spaces or anything like that, or even the public spaces, and try to prosecute you for existing. So this is the like interesting thing from a dialectics perspective, where like Marxism is super, super important, and why socialism is so useful for these kinds of situations, is that what Marx says in dialectics is that like class does not on its own, the word class does not mean the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. You notice that in the Communist Manifesto, he outlines the classes that we see today, the like dominant classes we see today. The dominant class is the bourgeoisie, and then the subordinate class is the proletariat. What he does not say is that patriarchy never existed, that racism doesn't exist, that like these sorts of questions of like national oppression don't exist. And in fact, like Lenin builds on this and talks about, Lenin and Stalin both build on this like theoretically and talk about the national question. So it's like, okay, class is just a word describing who has social power over who. And we could talk about intersectionality from this perspective of like, can you all still hear me all right? Okay, perfect. Sorry, my headphones just turned off for a moment. But it's like, Marx is not talking about class in the context of intersectionality, where intersectionality is like, class just means any number of antagonisms that exist. Marx is trying to say, what is the core antagonism, and how do we fight that to fight everything else as well? So it doesn't mean that we can't make our analysis specific. So it doesn't mean that queer socialists can't recognize that they are uniquely exhausted by work. They are also uniquely exhausted by their social position and their identity position and their interaction with other leftist spaces, and all of those things matter, right? But the primary thing is that they are still, under the system of wage labor that requires certain things of them, and that generates the conditions for everything else. And then similarly, when we talk about other intersecting identities, we have to talk about like Black queer people and trans people, right? Like Charles Shively does not have the same perspective that like Marsha P. Johnson does on the queer liberation movement. But that doesn't mean that, for example, we can't like unite and create coalitions in order to respond to these things in varied ways. So that was just my like soapbox on the class does not mean that we ignore identity. It just means that we have to take a particular analysis and understand what is dominant about that class, not just what is there about the class.
I would like to say I did read an article about the fagrag, an academic article that was like there's an assumption that the fagrag is like an all-white institution, but first of all, it clearly isn't. But secondly, it apparently has some of the first poems of this Native American gay author, and but like you wouldn't know that just by reading the magazine, just because the author of the article was like doing research on this poet and like went back into the fagrag to like find his poems. So I think that's really interesting that race issues are obviously part of that, are part of their analysis, a little bit. But yeah, one of the things that I was actually that you bring up, Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, is I was going to assign the Sylvia Rivera video, because I feel like usually people understand that video as her like the beginning of the revolution, as people play that like when they talk about Stonewall and that kind of thing. But it's not true. It's in 1974. That video, that speech is her being pushed out of the revolution. That's why she says, I fought with you, I've led with you, I've worked with you, and now you throw me to the side. That's why she's like that, and why she had to take the mic away from the previous speaker, is because she's being pushed out of the revolution in 1974 because gay liberation has failed. Yeah. And it kind of, and looking at it in that perspective, it's a very like bittersweet simply terrible, because we have not yet recognized that the gay rights movement, even though it now includes Black people and it now includes trans people to some degree, the gay rights movement is still not where it was in 1973. In 1971, the gay rights movement was more radical than it has been since. And this is why we're talking about the fagrag, because I want us to return to that, but also build on it and also be more socialist.
Period.
Okay. I feel like we said everything that there is to say about the fagrag. No, we haven't said everything, but we said a lot about fagrag.
You've said much.
You listening, we're gonna put and by we I mean Sarah, are going to put the links to the archive of the fagrag in the description of this video, so you can go and read the fagrag. And yeah, be gay, do socialism.
Do that.
Getting that tatted.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tramp stamp.
Do socialism. Okay. I think that's it. I think that's good.
Cut it.